It's the summer of 1970. Detroit is in the middle of the horsepower wars. Every automaker is trying to outdo the other. Bigger engines, bigger carburetors, bigger numbers printed on glossy brochures. The competition had become almost absurd. Engineers worked overtime trying to squeeze every last horsepower from their designs. Marketing departments invented new names for engine packages. Dealerships couldn't keep high-performance models on the lot. Ford has the Boss 429. Chrysler has the legendary 426 HEMI, and Chevrolet? Most people expected them to respond with something even bigger. Maybe another massive big block monster, maybe a new 500 cubic inch beast that would dwarf everything else on the road. That's what the formula demanded. More cubes, more power, more bragging rights, but instead, Chevrolet did something nobody saw coming. They built a small block, a 350 cubic inch engine. Just 350 cubes in an era when big blocks routinely exceeded 400, 440, even 450 cubic inches. It seemed almost ridiculous. And somehow, this little engine embarrassed machines twice its size. But what almost nobody realized at the time was how radical this engine really was. The engineering behind it, the risks Chevrolet took, and the reason it only lived for 3 short years. This is the story of the LT-1 small block and why it shocked the entire muscle car world. Because in the late 1960s, power in America usually meant one thing: cubic inches. That was the formula. That was the gospel. That was what every enthusiast believed. Big blocks ruled the streets and the racetracks. Engines like Chevrolet's own 396 and 454 dominated muscle cars. Massive iron blocks with huge bores, giant pistons, and torque that could twist drive shafts in half. These engines were monsters. They idled with a loping rumble that shook windows. They produced thrust that pushed drivers back into their seats. They made everything feel effortless. But those engines had a problem. They were heavy. A big block Chevrolet could weigh over 680 pounds, sometimes closer to 700 with all accessories attached. All that iron sat directly over the front wheels. It made cars nose-heavy. Handling suffered. Cornering became unpredictable. Try throwing a big block Camaro into a tight corner at speed. The front end would push. The tires would howl. The car would resist every input from the driver. And in road racing, that was a disaster. Trans Am racing demanded precision, quick direction changes, hard braking into tight corners, and then immediate acceleration out. Big blocks couldn't do that. They were drag strip weapons, straight-line missiles. But on a road course, they were clumsy. Chevrolet engineers knew something had to change. At the center of this shift was a man named Zora Arkus Duntov, often called the father of the Corvette. Duntov believed something radical. He believed a lighter, high-revving small block could beat a big block, not just on road courses, everywhere. Duntov had spent years pushing for lightweight performance at Chevrolet. He understood something that many American engineers overlooked. Weight was the enemy. Every extra pound meant slower acceleration, worse braking, reduced agility, more stress on suspension components. European racing had proven this decades earlier. Small displacement engines in lightweight chassis could destroy larger, heavier competitors. Duntov wanted to bring that philosophy to American muscle. But there was a problem. The existing small block Chevy engines weren't built for that kind of abuse. The original 350 small block had a 4.0-inch bore and a 3.48-inch stroke. Solid dimensions for a street engine. Dependable for everyday driving, perfect for the average customer who just wanted reliable transportation. But pushing it to extreme RPM was risky. Valve float, oil starvation, and weak valve train components could destroy an engine in seconds. The factory 350 was never designed to scream past 6,000 RPM lap after lap, and racing demanded more, much more. So Chevrolet engineers began designing something very different. They called it the LT-1. At first glance, it looked like a typical small block. Still 350 cubic inches, still a cast iron block with that familiar 4.00-inch bore and 3.48-inch stroke. Walk past it in a parking lot and you might not even notice anything special. But inside, almost everything changed. The compression ratio jumped to a brutal 11.01. That was extremely high for a street engine in 1970. It meant the engine squeezed the air-fuel mixture harder before ignition, producing more power, but also requiring high-octane fuel just to survive. Lower octane fuel would cause detonation. The fuel would ignite too early, pressure waves would hammer the pistons, and within miles, the engine would destroy itself. This engine demanded premium fuel, no exceptions. Then came the camshaft. Instead of a mild hydraulic cam like most street engines, the LT-1 used a mechanical solid lifter cam. That meant sharper valve timing, higher lift, and the ability to rev far beyond typical street engines. The camshaft specifications were aggressive by any standard. Duration was extended. Lift was increased. Overlap was pushed to the limits of street drivability. But solid lifters came with a trade-off. They were loud. They required frequent adjustment, and if the valve lash wasn't perfect, the engine could eat itself alive. Valves could contact pistons, timing could drift, performance would degrade rapidly. Chevrolet didn't care, because this engine wasn't designed to be polite, it was designed to dominate. They paired the cam with massive 2.02-inch intake valves and 1.60-inch exhaust valves inside specially designed cylinder heads. These heads flowed far more air than typical small block castings. The ports were carefully shaped. The combustion chambers were precisely machined. Every detail was optimized for maximum airflow at high RPM. Airflow meant power, and the numbers proved it. Officially, Chevrolet rated the LT-1 at 370 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. Torque came in at 380 pound-feet at 4,000 RPM. On paper, those numbers looked impressive, but here's where things get interesting. Those numbers were almost certainly underrated. Back then, manufacturers sometimes intentionally listed lower horsepower figures. Insurance companies were already watching muscle cars closely, and high numbers meant higher premiums. A 370 horsepower rating attracted less attention than 400, and young buyers desperately needed insurance they could actually afford. Real dyno tests later suggested the LT-1 could produce over 400 horsepower in stock form, from just 350 cubic inches. That meant this small block was producing more than 1.1 horsepower per cubic inch, a huge number for a factory engine in 1970. Most big blocks struggled to reach 0.9 horsepower per cubic inch. The little LT-1 was punching far above its weight, and it didn't stop there. The induction system was equally serious. A massive 780 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor sat on top of a high-rise aluminum intake manifold. Aluminum saved weight and dissipated heat better than iron, improving performance during long, high RPM runs. The carburetor was calibrated specifically for the LT-1's aggressive camshaft profile. Fuel curves were optimized for high RPM breathing. Throttle response was immediate. The ignition system was also upgraded. A special high-performance distributor allowed the engine to rev safely past 6,500 RPM. That was territory normally reserved for race engines. The distributor used a specially curved advance mechanism. Timing was optimized for the high compression ratio. Spark delivery remained consistent even at extreme engine speeds. Most big blocks ran out of breath by 5,500 RPM. The LT-1 just kept pulling, past 5,000, past 5,500, past 6,000. It seemed to come alive in ranges where other engines were already fading. And when drivers finally got behind the wheel, the results shocked everyone. In the 1970 Corvette, the LT-1 transformed the car. With the lightweight small block instead of the heavier big block, the Corvette handled like a completely different machine. Steering felt sharper. Turn-in was more immediate. The front end was more responsive. Weight distribution improved dramatically. The car felt balanced in a way big block Corvettes never could, but it was the acceleration that surprised people. Magazine tests recorded quarter-mile times around 13.8 seconds at nearly 103 miles per hour. For a naturally aspirated 350 cubic inch engine in 1970, that was astonishing. Big block cars with 150 more cubic inches sometimes struggled to match those numbers, and the sound? Completely different from a big block. Instead of deep thunder, the LT-1 screamed. The exhaust note started with a mechanical edge. Below 3,000 RPM, it sounded purposeful but restrained. Above 5,000 RPM, the engine produced a sharp mechanical roar as the solid lifters and aggressive camshaft pushed the valve train to its limits. It was visceral, aggressive, almost angry. Drivers said it felt more like a race car than a street car. One automotive journalist at the time described it as barely civilized. That wasn't a criticism, it was the highest compliment. But Chevrolet wasn't finished, because the LT-1 didn't just appear in the Corvette. In 1970, it also found its way into the Chevrolet Camaro Z28. And that's where the legend truly exploded. The Z28 had already built a reputation in the Trans Am racing series. This was serious competition. Factory-backed racing programs with professional drivers and unlimited budgets. Chevrolet needed a high-revving small block to compete against Ford's Boss 302 and other track-focused engines. The Boss 302 was a genuine threat. Ford had engineered that engine specifically for Trans Am competition. It revved high, it flowed air beautifully, it won races. Chevrolet needed an answer. The LT-1 was perfect. Installed in the Camaro Z28, the engine delivered blistering performance. The lighter front end made the car incredibly balanced through corners. Weight distribution approached the ideal 50-50 split that every chassis engineer dreams about. Road tests showed the Z28 could run the quarter mile in about 14 seconds flat. Top speed pushed past 130 miles per hour, but numbers only told part of the story. Drivers loved how the engine behaved. Below 3,000 RPM, it felt tame, almost polite. You could cruise through traffic without drama. You could idle at stoplights without the engine shaking itself apart. It was surprisingly civil when you wanted it to be, but once the tachometer climbed past 4,000, everything changed. The camshaft came alive. Airflow surged through those large valves. The engine pulled violently toward redline. It was like flipping a switch. One moment you were driving a normal car, the next moment you were piloting a rocket. The transition was dramatic, almost startling the first time you experienced it. Mechanics who worked on early LT-1 engines remembered just how extreme the internals looked. One mechanic reportedly said, "This thing looks like a race engine that accidentally ended up in a street car." And in many ways, that's exactly what it was. The tolerances were tighter than typical production engines. The components were more carefully selected. Quality control was stricter. This wasn't a regular assembly line engine with a few performance parts bolted on. This was something special. But there was a problem. Actually, several problems. The first issue was fuel. That brutal 11.01 compression ratio demanded premium high-octane gasoline. Without it, the engine would detonate. Pinging and knocking could destroy pistons quickly. Sustained detonation would hammer the piston tops, crack the ringlands, damage the bearings. Eventually, the engine would fail completely. In 1970, that wasn't a huge issue. High-octane leaded fuel was still widely available. Most performance enthusiasts knew to use premium anyway. But the world was changing fast. New emissions regulations were coming. The Clean Air Act was beginning to reshape the automotive industry. Lead was being removed from gasoline. Octane ratings were dropping. High compression engines suddenly became a liability. An engine that required premium fuel would soon require fuel that didn't exist. But even before regulations hit, the LT-1 had another weakness: maintenance. Solid lifter engines required regular valve adjustments. Every few thousand miles, someone needed to check the valve lash and reset it if necessary. If owners ignored maintenance, performance dropped quickly. The engine would become noisy, power would fade, efficiency would suffer. Worse, improper adjustments could cause catastrophic engine damage. Too tight, and valves could contact pistons at high RPM. Too loose, and the valve train would hammer itself to pieces. Many owners simply weren't prepared for this level of maintenance. They expected a normal car. They got a race car with a license plate. And then there was the oiling system. At sustained high RPM, small block Chevrolets sometimes struggled to maintain consistent oil pressure. If oil supply dropped even briefly, bearings could overheat and fail. Hard cornering could cause oil to slosh away from the pickup tube. Extended high RPM runs could aerate the oil. Track driving was especially punishing. Mechanics sometimes opened blown engines and found metal shavings throughout the oil pan, bearings destroyed, crankshafts scarred, connecting rods damaged beyond repair. It was the price of pushing a small block to racing limits. The engine gave everything it had. Sometimes that meant it gave too much. Still, despite the risks, the LT-1 became a legend almost instantly. Production numbers were relatively low. In 1970, only about 1,287 Corvettes were built with the LT-1 option. Camaro Z28 production was higher, but still limited compared to regular small block models. These engines were never meant to be mass-produced grocery getters. They were built for enthusiasts, for people who understood what they were buying, for drivers who wanted that raw mechanical experience regardless of the compromises. But just as the LT-1 reached its peak, everything began to collapse. By 1971, compression ratios across the industry started dropping. Manufacturers needed engines that could run on lower octane fuel and meet stricter emission standards. The Environmental Protection Agency was watching. California was implementing even stricter rules. The LT-1's compression ratio fell from 11.01 to about 9.01. Lower compression meant lower cylinder pressures. Lower pressures meant less power. Horsepower dropped from 370 to roughly 330. The engine was still impressive, still faster than most alternatives, but the edge was disappearing. Then the measurement system changed. Gross horsepower ratings, measured without accessories, were replaced by the more realistic SAE net ratings. Suddenly, the LT-1 appeared to produce just 255 horsepower. On paper, it looked like the engine had lost its magic. A drop from 370 to 255 seemed catastrophic. But the truth was more complicated. The power hadn't disappeared overnight. The way it was measured had simply changed. Gross horsepower tested engines without alternators, water pumps, or exhaust systems. Net horsepower tested engines as installed in actual vehicles. The numbers looked different, but the engines were still capable. Still, the writing was on the wall. Insurance companies were raising premiums for high-performance cars. Young buyers couldn't afford coverage. Sales declined. Emissions regulations tightened further. Engineers spent more time meeting government requirements than chasing horsepower. The muscle car era was ending. By 1972, Chevrolet quietly ended production of the original LT-1, just 3 years after it shocked the muscle car world. 3 short years. That's all the time this engine had. But the story didn't end there, because the LT-1 had already proven something important. You didn't need massive cubic inches to dominate. You needed airflow, compression, precision engineering, and an engine willing to spin faster than anyone expected. That philosophy would shape performance engines for decades. High-revving small blocks became the backbone of American performance. Racing teams adopted similar designs. Later generations of Chevrolet engines, like the LT series and LS series, would follow the same basic idea. Small displacement, big power, engineering over brute force. Today, original LT-1 powered Corvettes and Camaro Z28s are among the most collectible muscle cars ever built. Perfect examples can sell for well over 6 figures at auction. Collectors know what those engines represent, a brief moment in time, when engineers pushed a small block to its absolute limits, when 350 cubic inches could embarrass engines twice its size. And when Chevrolet proved that raw power wasn't just about size, it was about engineering, it was about precision, it was about vision. In the end, the LT-1 didn't just shock the muscle car world, it rewrote the rules. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments what engine you want to see next, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the machines that changed automotive history forever.